Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB. Thank you so much for coming back. If you're new, please consider subscribing. What I want to do is jump right in. You probably have seen the thumbnail here on YouTube, and I want to talk about this 1963 Lincoln Continental Convertible. Very unique. A lot has been done to this car, and I will say at the end of this video, I'm going to link to a video that I did about 10 months ago, because this car, believe it or not, is an Alumni car on Bring a Trailer. It did sell prior, which we will talk about, but in that other video, I go into a lot more detail. I show a lot of other photos that were not included in the original Bring a Sale or Bring a Trailer auction. So without further ado, I am going to jump in here and share my screen in a moment. I do want to mention I am a lifelong Green Bay Packer fan. That's a long story, and because it's a green car, what I went ahead and did is I brought out my Bart Starr old school poster, and ironically enough, he was on the Lincoln Mercury sports panel back in the day. Some of you old school folks may recall that, but I figured why not? We're talking about a green Lincoln, which is not always the case. So again, I do want to thank you if you're a continued supporter here. Please consider subscribing again if you are new. Now, I did start doing this video about less than a day ago, and it was at 10,000, and I knew by the time I had refreshed it, it already had bounced to 18, I believe it was, and now it's at, I just refreshed it, it's at 56, call it $57,000. I do believe this car is going to sell for a nice amount, and I'll talk about why in this video. Now, what I do want to do briefly is I didn't really update a lot of information. This was the prior presentation, but I would remind folks that there were 3,138 convertibles built in the model year 463, and 63 often is very, very sought after. Now, I didn't pull a new number from Haggerty's site. I typically will do that, but I can tell you this easily is a six-figure car all day, every day. So what I had mentioned prior was that this would appeal to probably a good amount of purists, but definitely some non-purists as well. And I referenced this video from J.E. Robeson Services, and they did a ton on this car. And I will tell you, if you watch the other video that I did, if you're interested, I talk a lot about the invoices that are included with this particular listing. Now, again, this listing is different than the one 10 months ago, right? Because someone bought the car. Oh, by the way, it sold February 22nd for $132,000. This is the previous listing that I'm showing here. The reason for that is because it's an Alumni car, it's a good amount of information to reference when you go over to the Alumni listing, which again, I'm going to put in the description of my video. Just look at how many invoices are here, and they're so detailed, and it really reinforces every little thing that this shop here was doing on it. Now, some of you are going to love the interior, some may not, but basically the way he describes this is kind of a high-end leather upholstery interior. He mentions it's kind of a Rolls-Royce interior, and I think that's like a common term in the industry based upon the type of leather and the styling of it, if you will. This car, we'll talk about a few things. It was a repainted car at some point, but I think when you look at it, you know, you're either going to like the color or you're not. I think it's very high end, and I could tell you probably to spend, depending on where you live, to go and do an interior like this, I mean, it's a lot of money. So, you know, what I would tell you is, yeah, you could eventually change it, but I think if you were to buy this car, more than likely, you're not looking to change anything on the interior, if you will. One thing, I actually might take that back. I'm not a huge fan of the floor mats in it, but just like changing the colors of a house, right? It's not too difficult. It's pretty simple overall, but that is a video that I will mention, or I'll link to, if you will, in the description. This car was entered in, I think, 2008 in the Lincoln Registry, based upon my note in the lower left corner. And there was even an entry on 2019. So there's a few different things out there, but it is in the Lincoln registry. If you're a fan of the channel, you know that I like to break down the VIN. If we look at the top, the number 3 represents the year, so 6-3. Wixom, Michigan, all of these 60s Lincolns were built there, the unibody cars. You have the N engine code, which is standard, the Mercury Etzel Lincoln 430. And then you have your 6 to 11 character digits. So the 4 is standard for the 63 year, pretty standard for the most of the 60s Lincolns. And then you have the 06344, which this stands for the 6,344 44th car off the assembly line. The total units at the bottom listed 31,233 for that model year. So kind of an earlier model, if you will, would have been built in, the earlier run of that, if that makes sense. And we'll look at the specific date here in just a moment. We do know that from the M code, so the color M, this is on Bring a Trailer as well. Again, I pulled this information from there. It was an original car that was white, so ermine white. It was repainted Riviera turquoise paint, I believe is how it was described prior. I'm just going to call it green. And we know the custom interior was redone. The key thing about this, if you're looking to buy a Lincoln, the LADSO, so that destination sales office, if you will, or district sales office, 52 means that this car spent some time, right? Of course, in California, dry climate, that's a plus for any of these Lincolns or any car rather. Now, I do believe I have a typo in the bottom left I forgot to fix. If we look at the date code, the 11K, we can look on the right column. This is the little grid that I put in here, and we know that K represents the month of October, and the 11 represents the 11th day in said month. So it would have been October 11th of 62, and that's where I have the typo because I know sometimes this throws folks off, but remember the manufacturers were ramping up the production of a car, let's say August, September of the previous year to have it ready to roll in dealerships, let's say October, typically of 62. The 63 model wouldn't have been available. So that's kind of where we get it. And I need to fix that typo there. Now, there's a bunch of pros of the listing that I had mentioned prior. What I'd like to do is kind of just jump over and let's look at what we're seeing, okay? This 63 Lincoln Continental Convertible is the first thing that's going to probably stick out to many is, wow, it kind of looks like a 64. And the reason you may think that is because of the wheel cover. So there are some folks that will go on a 61, 2, or 3 and put a 15-inch wheel, which Lincoln went to in 64, and that will typically then come with a 15-inch wheel cover. And that's what you see here. Essentially, you have the hubcap, in other words, of a 64 and up car. I think it looks great. The good news is there's plenty of wheel covers out there. If the person that looks to purchase this, if the wheel covers don't come with it, you could always get a set of wheels from one of what we refer to as the usual suspects, like Lincoln Land Inc. in Clearwater, and you could get a set of wheel covers and, you could go on your merry way if that's something you wanted to do. Sometimes folks will upgrade those because of the disc brake package that came in 65, but unless it states that, we would just assume that they went with the 15-inch wheel. Another reason for that, other folks will mention this as well, is it gives you a little bit better, easier options to purchase depending on where you're at and where you're buying your tires from. So I will throw that out there. But what we can see is a lot of these photos are taken in the shade, okay? And someone had mentioned in the comments they kind of wish that it was out in the sun. Although what I can tell you is when you scroll through these photos, car looks beautiful, engine bay looks beautiful, and it's a very, very, very nice car. We then get down to, you can see here, there's over 200 photos, right? There's a lot of photos. Now, I believe, in my opinion, the previous listing was even more complete, and that's what helped drive the sale of this car for $132,000 just 10 months ago, right? You have some very nice professional photos. It looks like in an indoor setting, warehouse of some sort, right? And you also have a ton of undercarriage photos, right? So underneath the car. I often talk about how important that is. The good news is, because this car is an Alumni car on Bring a Trailer, they mentioned that. And of course, I'm giving you the intel here. If it was me, I would go back and study these photos and take a look at it to see if this is up to your liking. Now, you will see underneath this car, obviously, everything was kind of repainted, if you will, but everything that we can see looks very, 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 very nice. Okay. They even went, which I typically don't see anyone do this. There is actually this heat shield, if you will, on the exhaust. And that's something a little bit different. Typically you're just going to have your Dynamat, aka sound deadening, underneath the jute, underneath the carpet, if you will, inside the kind of interior of the car. But certainly what they've done here is they've went this extra mile. You can also see here, you've got an O2 sensor, and you're probably, if you've honed in on that, you're probably thinking, well, why is there an O2 sensor? I will point out this car was updated to Holley Sniper electronic fuel injection, which is simply known as EFI. And the significance of that is essentially they do away with the carburetor. Now, I'm going to work on a video in the future to talk about EFI on these cars. Some people love it, some people hate it. What I will tell you is when you go to EFI on these vehicles, or any vehicle, you're going to have a higher pressure fuel pump, right? So that is going to get changed out as well. I was trying to find the photo here, and I may not. So there's that. Now, some people will argue and say, the EFI is better, because that it's essentially, there's kind of a computer control, if you will. It's not just a carburetor dumping fuel. Everybody's going to have their preference. Again, in a future video, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I will tell you the carburetors on these vehicles, the stock vehicles, they were made by Carter, and they are very, very reliable. However, you will see folks do this kind of as a step up. You'll also see people doing motor swaps like kind of no tomorrow now in these cars. Certainly everybody kind of has their preference, but the good thing is this looks just like a carburetor, and when the air cleaner is on it, you do not see that, which we can go back here and take a look. And if you were at a car show, as an example, you probably wouldn't, nobody would even realize that it is an EFI car, because you can't see it. Now, I will also point out here, you can see this little guy on the side of the air cleaner. I talked about this before, because this is a California car. It would have had that additional California emissions, but it is there is no hose from here over to here. Certainly, if I had a DSO 52, which I do, it'd be nice to kind of have that on there as well. But again, very, very minor in the grand scheme of things. I will kind of wrap this video up, because the other video is even more detailed. It's a very nice, I would call this a restored car, right? Full paint, carpet was removed from the car. I mean, a lot was done to this car. Very high-end interior, aka trim. Super clean. I mentioned the EFI system. It is an AC car, so that's going to add 10%. Super clean engine bay, exhaust. Again, they've went the extra mile. Aftermarket fuel tank, which is of course required for an EFI setup. So it's not the standard fuel tank. You're going to have an aluminum fuel tank out back. The paperwork, at least in the original listing, you could spend a lot of time going through it. I have already back in February, and it's very, very, very detailed. It doesn't have a 140 amp alternator, which is fantastic. They upgraded the headlights. I believe they mentioned in some of the invoices that I mentioned in the February listing. They talk about kind of a European headlamp. I think that they had to do a little bit of modification to the headlight buckets, if you will. I believe it has an interstate battery. The convertible top was, of course, replaced. New suspension. In the old listing, you can see the image 279 where it breaks down the detail. Rebuilt steering box, a lot has been done to this car. Pros of the listing, Dynamat, which is also known as just the typical term of sound deadening material. So the key callouts, the car is not 100% original. I think we got to that. That's not a deal breaker, right? That's just something to consider. If you were looking for, oftentimes folks go, hey, I want a car that hasn't been touched at all. Well, this isn't that, right? During the paint job, the door latches were painted. I don't mind it. But if you look, and you open the doors and you look in there, some people are going to like it because they're going to go, wow, it just blends a little bit better. That's very minor. Again, being very picky. I talked about this in the other video. I won't spend a lot of time here. If I recall correctly, on one of the invoices, they talk about Dextron. I forget if it's Dextron or Dexron, but they talk about the automatic transmission fluid that was used, I believe, in the top. And there's been some debate. I won't say a lot of debate, but there's been some debate over the years on, what you use. And I always refer back to Chris Dunn of Lincoln Land Inc., John Cashman, and some of Chris's employees like Eric and, some of the folks that have been in this industry for 40 plus years, right? They've been around these cars. Everybody says you use type F fluid in the top, right? Of course, the earlier 60s, 61, 62, 63, they originally used brake fluid, okay? But when those tops are upgraded and those components are replaced, you would go to the correct type, which is type F. So I that's not a deal breaker. I've never seen a study of like what would happen if you put a different type of fluid in. But that's something that I had called out prior. Was the steering column rebuilt? In one of the videos, they left the car idling while getting out of the vehicle. I always talk about, again, this was in the prior listing, so I don't want to beat up the current seller, right? Or if they happen to see this, definitely don't want to beat them up. But what I will say is, let me stop sharing my screen here, that if the steering column wasn't rebuilt, I've made this public service announcement many, 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 many times. You never leave these cars idling. That's just not the Lincolns as well. There are other Ford vehicles that would, quote, fall into reverse. And when we say fall, I'll give you an example. My 65 Lincoln, I have yet to take the time and take the steering column out and have my friend Tony rebuild it. I was going to help him. I helped him on my 64. Okay. When I'm backing up and I kind of go over the little gutter, if you will, to get into my driveway, if I'm backing up and I'm not holding that shifter right there, what it will do is it just kind of falls into neutral because I'm already in reverse, right? Well, the same can be happening when this car's idling. If it's in park and it's idling, and the way, there's basically an imperfection in the way. You could argue there's an imperfection in the way it was manufactured, but if you leave the car idling and that shifter falls from park and it just slips down to reverse, well, then the car's taking off, right? So I'm not going to say much more than that, but in the original listing, I did call that out. It's a very big thing. It's not that difficult to rebuild the steering columns. There's a couple ways to do it. There's actually people that debate, can you do it the other way or do you have to do it this way? It's just one of those things in the Lincoln world. But I will say that this car, when it was at 18,000, and I did this video yesterday and I decided to redo it to make it a little bit more efficient, I basically said that I believe that this car will sell for more than 120,000. Now, it's easy for me to say, hey, it's going to blast past 132. That's where it hit prior. I do believe that it easily could, and it should. I mean, this car has a lot of time and effort in it. Now, some people might think I'm crazy, right? And I've said this before. I've seen people pay 100, 110, 120 for cars that are nowhere at all in the same galaxy as this car, okay? Is this car perfect? None of these cars are perfect, okay? As an example, and this is coming back to me because I did this last night, there's a photo that when you look at this car on the current listing, you look at the driver's side mirror, okay? It's not perfect, right? That's fine, right? These cars are never all perfect, right? You could easily go and have someone rechrome that mirror. They are made out of pot metal, if I recall correctly, so not everybody does pot metal chroming, but certainly you could even find like an NOS, which stands for new old stock, and you could replace it. You could make that little improvement on the car. So these cars are never typically perfect, but the key is, I've seen people pay 100 grand for a Lincoln that I'm just like, wow, I wouldn't have paid 18 grand for it. Everybody has a different mindset when it comes to this. But when you look at this car, when you look at the invoices, and if you find a shop that's willing to take on and change a top and change all the different components that they changed, and they do it all, that stuff adds up. And you will see that in those invoices on that original listing. In closing, I'll put the original listing link. I'll put the new listing link. I'll put the link to the YouTube video for the gentleman that did the video. His shop, I believe, did the restoration / interior. And I think there was one more. In the original video, I do talk about where I got a bunch of the photos from, and I think it was on their Facebook page. There was a huge album with a couple hundred photos, and I think I shared some of those on the original video. Take care, everyone. Let me know what you think. What did I miss? Oh, it is a single pot reservoir for the brakes. I would upgrade it to dual, but hey, that's just me. Take care, everyone. Peace.